The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We talked last week about Operation American Spring, where 10 million to 30 million patriotic Americans would be heading into Washington, D.C. to force President Obama out of the White House. How did it go, Lewis? Well, not that well. They were about 9.995 million Americans short of that 10 million low-end bar that they estimated, and they were absolutely not happy about it. Those who did show up in Washington had a really long laundry list of grievances ranging from, of course, Benghazi to Obamacare to President Obama's birth certificate. As you know, Lewis, these are the foremost issues of our time. Are you at all surprised that their estimate of 10 to 30 million may have been just a hair inflated?
It seemed just a little bit far-fetched to me that they would amass that many people. To be honest, I don't even think that many people had even heard of it.
They interviewed one birther who said what caused Benghazi was a kidnapping gone awry from Barry Soetoro. He was going to kidnap Mr. Stevens, the ambassador, and he got killed in the process. That's what really happened. That's the truth. Here's video of one completely enraged T-nut wondering why nobody showed up, and then another person comes on camera and starts making excuses. Check this out. I gotta love this.
Go for it. Look, man. Where are you at?
All right, so you're gonna bring.
Where are you at? We put the call out last week, 2 months ago, 5 months ago. You talk about being here. Where are you at? Because we're here.
Get him, man.
5 minutes. I didn't want to get too relevant.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of people who are trapped in the camps. They're landlocked because of the flood that came to this area locally. So they're here, and they're going to be coming out. We're here for the duration. They're not physically right in this spot with us now because they're trapped on the campgrounds that are surrounded by water.
That's it. The 20 million, the 30 million people, they didn't show up because they were trapped in camps. Otherwise, they would have been there. Here's another one saying that it may take some blood. It may take some blood to take back America.
This is the America that you all live in today, and it has to end. And I'm telling you right now, it's going to take, in my view, a little blood. It's going to happen. This day is coming, and you better be willing to pay for it.
They really don't understand that as crazy as the views held by so many Americans are, not that many of even that extremist group is so out of control that they're going to show up to something like this, demanding that with blood and guns, President Obama be removed from the White House. These right-wingers are really displaying every characteristic of cult membership.
It's true. Could we call them feverent? Is that fair?
They're absolutely feverent. They are blindly accepting whatever their right-wing websites are telling them, with absolutely no ability to judge for themselves or evaluate what they're being told. These must be the exact same people who swore up and down that Mitt Romney was going to win. And when the polls actually showed, when results showed that President Obama had won, they said it must have just been a liberal lie or some kind of liberal conspiracy. So there it is, 10 to 30 million ended up being, by the biggest estimates, 400 to 500 people. So a little bit shy of what they predicted. Chris Christie. Remember Chris Christie back on December 13th of 2013 when Bridgegate first exploded? This was the closure of some lanes of the George Washington Bridge, which backed up traffic in New Jersey to an insane degree. It also led to first responders, medical responders, not being able to get to people in the time that they should have otherwise been able to. And Chris Christie said the following on that day.
Factually, it did not get to me. And the first I ever heard about the issue
was when it was reported in the press, which I think was in the aftermath of the leaking of Mr. Foy's email. I think that was the first I heard of it, but it was certainly well after the whole thing was over.
Well, a lawyer representing Christie's former campaign manager, Bill Stepien, now says that it was not true. The claim that Chris Christie made, which is that the first he heard about it was much later on, is not true. The letter demands a correction be issued where Christie was cleared of any role in the scandal. And among the demands, the letter says that Christie must retract the portion of the report saying that Stepien had falsely assured Christie that he had no prior knowledge of the lane realignment. So let's take it piece by piece. Chris Christie's claim is, number one, he knew nothing about the lane closures until way after they were done, but also that all of his staff told him that they knew nothing about the lane closures until much later. We now are getting firsthand from one of his staffers that no. I went to Christie and said, yes, I did know about it while it was going on. The only question that remains now, Lewis, is whether Christie himself knew about it while it was still going on. My surprise level, because every single claim so far other than that one has been debunked, my surprise level, if it turns out Christie knew about it all along, would be probably negative.
Right, because we already know at this point that he's lied about this thing. So how surprised would we be if he orchestrated it? Yeah, not very.
And to say orchestrated, maybe it's not, he was literally the puppet master, but I would
endorsed.
Be not at all surprised if he endorsed it, knew about it, silently was indifferent to it. Is there anyone left in our audience who doesn't see this for what it is at this point? And I think at this point, it almost doesn't matter, Lewis, because it's pretty clear that Chris Christie's image has been so tarnished that he is not really a realistic Republican candidate for president, is he?
I really doubt it. I mean, first palling around, as they say, with Obama. A lot of people didn't like that. And now this, I just don't see how he could possibly stand a chance.
Last week, I interviewed Joe Messina, who was talking all about what he sees as the huge persecution of Christians in the United States. Of course, that's non-existent. However, I've been receiving a deluge of emails over the last few days saying David isn't going to cover the Christian woman who has been sentenced to death for being Christian in Sudan. Well, we were just off over the weekend. I am going to cover that story. If you haven't heard of it, a Sudanese court sentenced Mariam Yahia Ibrahim, 27 years old, to death for her refusal to recant her Christian faith. Her husband told CNN he feels like he is completely helpless. Ibrahim is Christian, but the court considers her to be Muslim. The court convicted her of apostasy as well as adultery and sentenced her to 100 lashes because her marriage to a Christian man is considered void under Sharia law. The court gave her until Thursday to recant her Christian faith. She refused to do that, and her legal team now plans to appeal the verdict. In the meantime, Ibrahim, who is 8 months pregnant, remains in prison with her 20-month-old son. Born to a Sudanese Muslim father and an Ethiopian Orthodox mother, her father left when she was 6 years old. Ibrahim was raised by her mother as a Christian. Amnesty International is saying that she is a prisoner of conscience. Sudan is one of the most difficult countries in the world to be Christian. This is despicable. This is just as despicable as the emails I get focused on this one case from right-wingers pretending that the real problem with religion is only the persecution of Christians, which is really a drastic misstatement, misunderstanding of the key thing, Lewis, which is really religious extremism in all forms and from all faiths.
That's true, but we do have to point out that those in America who compare their, quote, persecution to stories like this in Sudan or in Egypt are just complete idiots. They're completely out of their minds. I don't think they have any concept of what religious persecution can actually be like. This is an example of that.
Of course, this is an actual example. Being told that you're being boycotted by the public because you won't serve gay people, That's not Christian prosecution, right? They should, if they really want to see Christian prosecution or prosecution of people based on religious beliefs, they should go to other parts of the world. And this is exactly that type of story. What we need to realize is that this type of violence from religious extremism has to be considered on a timeline. We have this story, yes, but we can't forget that in Christianity, we've had the Crusades, the Inquisition, Reformation, witch hunts, etc. We know that with mass following of any religion, any so-called sacred texts, we will see those sacred texts misused to justify violence and discrimination. And this should really be a cautionary tale about all extremist religious beliefs, not just Islam, which is really the focus of most of the Christians that are emailing me.
Right. That seems to be the source of all evil for them. But also, let me add that the government in Khartoum is the same government that has been slaughtering indigenous black people in Darfur for about 10 years now. So, I mean, this type of thing is probably happening way more often than we would think in Sudan.
All right. We got an email from Ryan about a congressional candidate who believes that 99% of mass shootings are perpetrated by Democrats. Also, he boasts that he has more guns and ammunition than any other candidate. Apparently, that makes him the most qualified candidate. This is an Arizona Republican named Gary Keene. He's a rancher looking to unseat Representative Ann Kirkpatrick, who's a Democrat. And he made the claim at a Republican primary debate on Saturday that if you look at all the fiascos that have occurred, 99% of them have been by Democrats pulling their guns out and shooting people. So I don't think you have a problem with the Republicans. Keene also boasted he has more guns and ammo than any other competitors. And it's just amazing. Let's take it piece by piece. The claim that 99% of mass shootings are conducted by Democrats is, of course, completely false. The radical right continues presenting this myth. Roger Hedgecock, who's a conservative radio host, seems to have originated this right after the Newtown shooting, and President Obama was planning a response to gun violence, and Roger Hedgecock said, hey, it's mostly Democrats that are doing this in the first place. Very few gunmen actually have a coherent ideology or party affiliation. Certainly, we've seen more with this kind of anti-government ideology, which is typically more associated with the right than it is with the left. But to attribute a party affiliation is not only is it probably completely inaccurate, of course, to say that 99% are Democrats, but it's probably really not productive to even couch it in those terms. But to Gary Keene, it seems to be not only accurate, but something to boast about for his campaign. I don't even understand this guy.
I don't know. Who knows? Maybe this could work in Arizona. It's starting to become a pretty popular thing to have your campaign ads be images of you with guns, talking about guns.
In this particular case, Lewis, a campaign ad where there's clearly been photoshopping done simply to mirror. I mean, it's like a weird vortex video image, I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Who knows what's going on? But as long as you have a gun in your hand, they think that it means you have a better chance of winning.
Don't the vast majority of shooters actually resemble many of Gary Keene's characteristics? Deluded extremist views on reality, an obsession with firearms, evidence of mental illness. It actually seems like Gary Keene is closer to 99% of the shooters than so-called Democrats are. But maybe I just completely misunderstand some kind of key issue that would explain to me why Gary Keene is right. I don't know. Let's take a break. We have an excellent show planned for you today. Glad you're with us on this Monday. We'll be right back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com shows you how to unskew uncomfortable facts so that they'll fit nicely into the conservative worldview. Unskew reality. Learn how at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Tom Nakayama. Tom, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. And it's a very special day for Tom to be member of the day because we have two members being inducted into the Membership Hall of Fame. This happens when you have been a member for 4 years. And we currently have two members who fall under that umbrella, Mul Vassie and Bob Young. Bob Young from our affiliate on the West Coast, Fort Bragg, California, KNYO. Bob Young and Mul Vassie joining the David Pakman Show Membership Hall of Fame, which gets you a free apparel item. Just email me, let me know what you want. We'll send it out to you. You can, of course, support the program with the Amazon.com shopping you already plan to do. Go to our website, davidpakman.com. Click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. Then just do your shopping. A couple of interesting items purchased in the last few days through our Amazon banner by our viewers, Lewis. Mein Kampf, Hitler's book Mein Kampf. I have never read it. And I hear from many people it is just fascinating to read and see the early thoughts of one of the most evil, deranged men in the history of civilization. For whatever reason, my curiosity has never been piqued enough to sit down and read the book, Lewis.
Right. Same here. I have not read it, although I'd be open to it.
And American Pie 4 DVDs. Several people buying American Pie 4. I remember being not 17 yet and having a lot of trouble getting into American Pie 1 and eventually getting in and thinking it was like the funniest movie. And then American Pie 2 was, it was okay, but it was not quite as funny. And if I recall, Lewis, the entire series kind of jumped the shark eventually, didn't it?
It did, yeah. I'm sure if we went back and watched the first one again, we might think it was slightly humorous, but probably not as funny as we did when we were young.
All right, Panic on Fox News. Elizabeth Hasselbeck looks dumbfounded. She actually looks disgusted, like she's chewing on lemons, when she interviews a guest who says, you know what, marijuana isn't really that scary. Elizabeth Hasselbeck did an interview where she was talking to former Patriots linebacker Sean Stuckey, who's also an attorney, and asking about this new NFL policy that is reducing the harshness of penalties for being caught using marijuana. And Stuckey pointed out that, listen, not only is public opinion shifting to where marijuana use is more acceptable, but the reality here is that if you ban marijuana altogether, you're not going to stop people from using it. So it's not really a matter of influencing kids. And he gives a great example. Now, when he starts giving this example about alcohol, if you're watching, watch carefully, her face goes completely sourpuss, like she chewed on a lemon. And she is just disgusted and ends the interview as quickly as possible. Watch.
So why? I think parents would be concerned that this is something that is opening up in the NFL. No?
Well, this is something that I'm sensitive to. I understand the public sentiment, or maybe it's not a widespread sentiment, but I understand the sentiment that if you allow NFL players to use marijuana, that you're going to find a bunch of kids out there using it as well. I'm particularly sensitive to this issue because I come from a family where 6 out of 7 of my aunts and uncles at one point were all addicted to crack cocaine, including my mother, who was addicted up until a couple of years ago and was addicted from the time I was 12 years old.
Right.
So I understand that. And however, I was also a high school teacher where I taught young teenagers. And I am intimately aware of what the teenagers are influenced and not influenced by. The NFL changing its policy towards marijuana will not influence these teenagers. Let me give you an example. If the NFL were to immediately ban the use of all alcohol amongst all football players, you would not find a widespread cessation of alcohol use amongst teenagers. So
Perhaps. Sean, I think your story is so interesting, and you have a unique perspective, both as player, attorney, and just with your personal background.
Yeah, when I saw this, Lewis, it's just so funny. I guess it didn't go exactly the way she planned. Her face literally looked repulsed as soon as Sean Stuckey started making this obvious argument that, hey, if you announce that all alcohol is banned for NFL players, football fans aren't going to stop drinking all of a sudden. What are we really talking about? And Elizabeth Hasselbeck just looked like she could, she just wanted to spit out or something.
Right. Take pot over the past X number of years. It was banned in the NFL. It's been banned in the country. Did that stop anyone from using it? I don't think so.
I also like how she says people go to a program. Imagine going to a program for just like every once in a while casual marijuana usage. This conservative worldview of wanting to conserve, right? If people like Elizabeth Hasselbeck were in charge, we'd be driving V8 Edsels, using corded phones, selling cigarettes in high school vending machines, and DNA testing in criminal trials would still be would be against the law, right? This is the world in which Elizabeth Hasselbeck would have us live.
It would probably be something similar to this. Yeah, certainly a world we would not want to live in. We can safely say that.
So Glenn Beck has been doing some renovations in his studio over the last few weeks, and Glenn Beck on his program continues to transform himself into this kind of prophet of a doomsday scenario. We've been talking about it all the time. And Glenn Beck now went on one of the most strange soliloquies about how, number one, there are certain things he has not been told he can tell his audience about yet. Wow, big secrets. But also that he's figured out his audience is the smartest audience ever of any program, period. Check this out.
It's funny. I've been counseled every step of the way not to tell people about things. And there are some things, I've found Paul says this a lot. I have been commanded to say things, and I believe I have been commanded to say a few things too from time to time. And then Paul also says, by permission, I will tell you these things. I have not received permission to tell you some things yet, but that's not crazy. The guy who told me when I first got into television, Joel Cheatwood, who was our vice president at CNN, now the president of content here, he said to me, Glenn, you got to change the camera every 30 seconds. Got to change something on the screen. People are stupid. I could wear this tie in one shot and a red tie in the next shot, and the viewers won't know the difference. He came to my office yesterday and he said, Glenn, your audience is the smartest audience I think ever in television. They know some of the emails we have that you are noticing things.
Let's assume it's a joke from Glenn Beck's point of view, right? Who actually believes that Glenn Beck is some kind of messenger and there are certain things that a higher power hasn't yet okayed Glenn Beck to tell us about, right? It's either a situation where Glenn Beck is completely out of his mind and disconnected from reality, or, Lewis, Glenn Beck is actually just playing a character and it's his audience that has absolutely no connection to reality whatsoever.
It's possible that he's playing a character. I think that certainly would be, profitable. It would make sense. I mean, oftentimes I think to myself, how can he be this crazy?
Right.
But yeah, this is just another part of that snake oil salesman hoax type thing he has going on. He leads people on. He tells them things like this and they eat it right up.
Can Glenn Beck's audience be that smart if they haven't realized that either they or Beck are completely out of their minds?
My argument is that his audience is one of the dumbest, because if you're still watching his show and you haven't realized that he's been trying to sell you stuff for the past 10 years nonstop, you are a pretty stupid person.
Right. Along those lines, Glenn's message from God has been brought to you by Mormon Food Storage and Goldline. So just in case you were wondering, that is a sponsored message from God that Glenn Beck is bringing you. Bill Blunden next. We will talk about internet surveillance, technological security and privacy, and much more. Stay with us. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Bill Blunden joins me today. He's an independent computer security researcher, also author of the book Behold a Pale Farce, Cyber War, Threat Inflation, and the Malware Industrial Complex. Bill, it's great to talk to you, and thanks for being here. This is just generally an area where legitimate fears and hyperbole seem to mix, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's what. So let's start with maybe the broadest question. When it comes to cyber warfare and malware, what really are the most pressing risks that the average everyday American should be aware of?
Well, I definitely think that there is an awful lot of cybercrime. I mean, if you look at the Target breach recently, I believe it cost Target something like $200 million to recover from that. And there's also espionage, obviously. Some of it we're involved in. And there's sabotage, too. If you look at Stuxnet, we sabotaged their uranium enrichment facility. So I would say there's lots of cybercrime, there's espionage, there's sabotage. And while they aren't existential problems, I think they're serious problems, and they need to be addressed. And I think on a day-to-day basis, those are the real threats that the average person is going to face.
So let's talk about some of the doomsday scenarios that maybe people have heard about. In fact, some that some guests on our program have talked about in more detail. So these would be a total takedown of the electrical grid for the country or parts of the country, attacking the banking system in a way that would make everyday transactions impossible, financial markets, and significantly affecting the everyday financial transactions that we're involved in. How real are those threats, in your opinion?
I think from the standpoint of statistical analysis, there is no data on any of this. There are plenty of metaphors they use. They use terms like Cyber 911, Cyber Katrina, Cyber War. They use terms like Cyber Armageddon or Cybergeddon shortened. And like I said, there's no data on this, so it's hard to really make a solid prediction, at least from a quantitative standpoint. But the people who are promoting these ideas, they tend to focus on how bad it'll be when it happens. And I think this is their tell, that this is not intended, this message isn't intended to appeal to reason. It's there to appeal to emotion. It's there to incite an emotional response. It's there to elicit anxiety and to kind of foment a crisis mentality. This is what's called threat inflation. It's a propaganda technique that's being used. And we saw it before in the Iraq War when President Bush and other White House officials talked about the smoking gun that came in the form of a mushroom cloud. And when you get someone who's in an anxious position, who's kind of in a crisis mentality, they'll pay any amount of money to be safe. But if you think about it, a rational person, even though there are several types of insurance you could buy, there's countless types of insurance, but you don't go out and buy every type of insurance. You carefully compute what your risk is to each threat, and then you make a cost-benefit analysis, and you decide carefully how you're going to protect yourself. And when you're in this crisis mentality, when you're anxious, and you've been kind of subjected to threat inflation, you're in a position where you can waste a lot of resources and yield up your civil liberties and try to protect yourself at a very high cost, and in doing so neglect these genuine threats that we face on a day-to-day basis. I think that the actual threat of Cyber Armageddon is actually pretty low. And a lot of officials agree with this. The people who run the grid organizations, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the chief executive of that organization says, we're not worried about the cyber threat. We're far more worried about the physical threats. And that would make sense because there actually are a lot of instances where there have been physical instances that brought down power. And the same thing with the banking industry. I think that people don't give the banking industry enough credit. Large financial institutions like the Federal Reserve, they have all sorts of elaborate disaster recovery measures in place. And they go to great lengths. They have professionals who are dedicated to keeping these networks safe. And to think that you're going to disable our financial institutions, they keep backups, and they keep them in vaults underground. I think to stop an institution like the Federal Reserve, to really grind it to a halt over a long term, you'd probably need a nuclear first strike.
So you mentioned something interesting there, which was the amount that you're willing to give up in terms of privacy or civil liberties seems to be directly correlated to how afraid or anxious you are about a particular scenario. And we've talked about this quite a bit recently in light of the revelations from Edward Snowden, which, if you had paid attention to the passing of the Patriot Act, and if you saw the level of fear and thus what Americans were willing to accept in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, you wouldn't really have been that surprised by the revelations of Edward Snowden, which kind of gets us to another area I wanted to ask you about. We often hear the response to news that there is surveillance being done of Americans of, listen, I'm confident I'm not doing anything wrong. And therefore, I just don't really care. Go ahead and spy on me. I don't really care. It makes no difference to me. In general, my responses to that is, well, listen, we have a certain level of overcriminalization in this country. And even if you truly believe you're not really doing anything wrong, having this information in the hands of different government agencies may at some point in the future, who even knows what laws you may be breaking or may have retroactively broken at some point. And that makes me very cautious. But I'm wondering, are there better arguments against those who say, hey, I'm doing nothing wrong, I don't care?
I think that we need to understand very clearly that these civil liberties are safeguards against oppression, against despots. And the people who founded them believed enough to die for them. And anyone who's grown up, my wife grew up in Beijing during the Cultural Revolution. She knows what it's like to live in a police state. Anyone who lived in Russia during the reign of Stalin understands why you need these liberties, why they're important, because you don't know how much you miss them until they're taken away. And I think to an extent, we're starting to see signs of the same illness here in the United States. For example, the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act has detainment provisions, which are very unsettling for journalists and activists who could be deemed cooperating with terrorists somehow and be detained without any sort of due process. I think that, this whole, right now we exist in a surveillance state. I have no doubt in my own mind that we have, the corporate players and the government spies have put in place a mechanism where they can monitor almost everything at real time. And to assume that our secret policies, which are judged by courts that are secret, and issue mandates that are secret, to believe that this secret mechanism will safeguard us from devolving into a police state, I think is really the height of recklessness. I think it's a huge threat to our democratic republic.
See, it's interesting because I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Bill. And the issue I have, and I ask this not in a rhetorical sense, but this is really an internal discussion that we have all the time on the program, which is, on the one hand, I generally tend to agree with the ideas you're espousing when it comes to surveillance, although maybe in a little bit less of a, apocalyptic sense. But at the same time, there's a crossover between the beliefs you've just espoused with regard to surveillance and the extreme pro-gun, Second Amendment, gun-toting enthusiasts that are supporting all sorts of laws that I think are quite destructive in different states around the country. Do you see the two sides as one battle, so to speak, or do you see how the two may be different?
I think that if you wanted to really draw a distinction between the civil libertarians and the libertarians, it has to do with ultimately the role of government. Obviously, libertarians, they believe they can exist without government. And my response to that is, if you want to see what it's like to live in a society without any government, go hang out in the tribal regions of Pakistan for a little while. The civil libertarians, they believe that government's actually, it should be there as a safeguard against things like people dumping toxic waste, for example, or the banks who are running rampant right now. So, ostensibly, the government's there to safeguard us. Obviously, it's not doing a very good job of that. But I think in terms of civil libertarians and libertarians, you have basically right-left kind of. It has to do, the difference between the two has to do with role of government. But I think there is some common ground in terms of the idea of, are we going to trade liberty for security? And there was an op-ed piece that was written by Tom Friedman in the New York Times several months back. It was called Blowing a Whistle. And he basically said his argument was that we should give up a little bit of our liberty, just give up a little, just so that we can prevent an attack which will end up taking away all of our freedoms. So that this attack will be so great, this terrorist attack will be so apocalyptic, that it will end all of our other freedoms, and we'll end up, in a really bad situation. So he said, I'd be willing to give up a little liberty out front to safeguard ourselves against such an attack. And I think there was enough negative response that Bill Keller actually wrote a second op-ed shortly afterwards, reinforcing and trying to bolster Tom Friedman's position. But ultimately, they're both saying that we should undermine the Constitution to save it. And it reminds me of Iraq, where we said we have to destroy Iraq in order to save it. And I think that even our founding fathers disagreed with this. Benjamin Franklin, for example, said those who would yield essential liberty on behalf of a little temporary security deserve neither liberty or security. And I agree. I think in this case, it's not terrorism that destroys freedom. It's our response to terrorism that destroys freedom. The British government, back during World War II, when they were being bombed by the Germans, they would hang these signs out that said, "Remain calm, carry on."
Right.
And I think that's what we need to do. I think if you look at how Japan handled the nerve gas attacks by the Aum Shinrikyo, did they rely on indefinite detention? Did they torture people? Did they use mass interception? Did they suspend civil liberties? They didn't do any of that. No, they had their police conduct investigations. They indicted people and they tried them in a civilian court. Very simple, very straightforward. They remained calm and they carried on. And I think that's what we need to do as a country.
Very interesting. The distinction between civil libertarians and libertarians, definitely something we're going to explore further. The book is Behold, a Pale Farce. Bill Blunden, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This might be the most sickening political stunt, certainly of the year. A conservative blogger was arrested over the weekend after allegedly trespassing at a nursing home where Mississippi Senator Tad Cochran's wife lives and posting a picture of the Republican's spouse online without permission. Why would he do that? Well, Cochran's wife, Rose Cochran, suffers from dementia, according to the Jackson Clarion Ledger. She lives at the St. Catherine's Village retirement home in Madison, Mississippi, where she is bedridden. Clayton Thomas Kelly is a guy who runs a political blog called Constitutional Clayton, where he posted a story attacking Cochran and supporting Senator Chris McDaniel, who's the guy challenging Cochran in the state's Republican primary this year. The piece includes a picture that was taken in Rose Cochran's room in the nursing home where she has lived since the year 2000. Police have arrested him, saying that he illegally and improperly obtained an image of a vulnerable adult resident without their consent for his own benefit. Also charged with exploitation of a vulnerable adult, bond set at $100,000. Just disgusting. Can you imagine, Lewis, taking a picture of a woman who is suffering from significant illness, right? Significant mental degradation, and posting it online, but I guess with the goal of helping the candidate that he supports over the guy whose wife, through no fault of anyone, is bedridden with advanced dementia.
It's incredible. And to think he'd get away with it, I don't know. Now, what happens to the person who hired him to do this?
Well, okay, so here's the thing. The argument being made now is that there is no connection at all between the blogger and the McDaniel campaign. We have no evidence to suggest that that's not the case right now. It seems like this guy has a blog and in his own demented worldview, thought that posting this picture would help the guy he's supporting. We don't have any evidence, though, that he was hired by anybody. But of course, I mean, you can't rule anything out. Right.
Okay. I guess if he was acting independently, that's pretty much the end of it. But yeah, a little disturbing, David. But I don't know. I'm not surprised that people will go to this length to see their candidate reach office.
In Round Rock, Texas, going from Mississippi to Texas, we're learning about a man who is facing 5 years to life in prison for allegedly making and selling pot brownies. Police in Round Rock arrested Jacob Lavoro. He has now been charged with a first-degree felony. If you think that's harsh, his attorney and family agree with you. Joe Lavoro is his father. He said, it's outrageous. It's crazy. I don't understand it. 5 years to life? I'm sorry. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm a conservative. I love my country. I'm a Vietnam vet. But I'll be damned. This is wrong. This is damn wrong. Well, voting for conservatives might be the first mistake if the dad doesn't want pot brownies to be criminalized to this extent.
Yeah, Round Rock is actually just north of where I am. And it really does, in some ways, seem like a completely different world from Austin. And I think you nailed it. I mean, if these people keep voting for these ultra-conservative religious people, this is the type of thing you're going to be seeing happening for a long time in Texas.
Jacob Lavoro has a clean record. The charge is supposedly so severe because the recipe for the pot brownies includes hash oil. The hash ingredient allows the state to use the sugar, cocoa, butter, and other ingredients to determine the weight of the drug. So essentially, the entire brownie is weighed as drugs, even though it is, of course, just a tiny bit of hash oil that is in there, and that's what's making the possession quantity so high. It's just ridiculous. We have inequality. We're going around killing people all over the world. We have an inability to provide everybody with health care. Religious doctrine is being injected into public school curricula, and we're going after a guy for hash oil in his brownies, 5 years to life. How can you talk sense into anyone who thinks that this is a logical arrangement of priorities?
You can't, David. They've been either completely brainwashed or completely off of their rocker. It's funny how often it comes down to tiny little interpretations of laws, archaic laws that end up with you weighing the entire baked good instead of measuring the actual amount of drugs in it.
We have a voicemail number. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. Call us anytime. Here's a voicemail about smart guns.
Hi, David. This is Kathy from Irvine. I have a comment about the story about the police officer who didn't want to trust a smart gun in the field. I think that may be a valid concern now while the technology is new, but I would ask that police officer how he feels about taking his smartphone into those dusty, dangerous, dirty situations.
This is a really good point, right? Which is, the concern about when there are more moving parts, more can go wrong. That's a legitimate concern. But at this point, are people saying, no, I'd rather have my really old flip phone instead of my smartphone because there's more stuff that could break on the smartphone. With smart guns, it could be the same thing, Lewis, that as the technology progresses, we would realize that it's not actually more likely to not function.
Maybe, maybe not. I certainly know a small handful of people who keep more durable flip phones with them because of their jobs as opposed to more delicate smartphones. So I don't know.
One more voicemail. Let's take a listen here.
David, well done with that interview with Joe Messina. Oh, my gosh. The question about how obviously religion is an arbitrary class and, oh, man, his face, it's like he never even thought about that. I thought he was going to denounce his own religion right then and there. Oh, well done. Wow. And this f***ing list with the anti-Semitic thing, 6 out of 11. I mean, I would say it should be 1 out of 11, but, hey, what can you do? And, the whole ping pong deal, Nazis versus Jews, come on, Lewis. Of course it's offensive. And you're Jewish. Come on, Lewis. Come on, get with the program. Anyway, great show. You guys, great. Bye.
All right, Lewis, referring to Lewis's position on Nazis versus Jews beer pong on the bonus show and saying, Lewis, of course it's offensive. What is on today's bonus show? Rush Limbaugh, an honored children's author. Yeah, this is ridiculous. We'll also talk about the continuing battle of sriracha hot sauce and much more. DavidPakman.com/membership. The bonus show, only one of any number of compelling reasons to become a David Pakman Show member. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. We are funded by our audience, and I welcome and invite your support. Talk to you in a few minutes on the one and only David Pakman Show bonus show, hosted by producer Louis Motamedi.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.